everybody, Mr. Johnston here. We're outside today, just south of Shakopee High School. We're standing right on the edge of the deciduous forest, and we're gonna talk today about how we can use some resources from this forest to collect and harvest maple sap in order to make maple syrup. And there's three important things that we need to talk about how to do. One, how do we identify maple trees out of all the different types of trees in this forest? Two, how do we actually collect that sap out of the maple trees? And three, how do we take that sap and turn it into maple syrup? So we're out here in the woods now, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about what makes maple trees so special. There are, as you can see, lots and lots of trees out here in this woods, and they're not all maple trees. Maple trees are a unique tree. One of the things that maple trees do is right before they shut down in the fall, they take all of that sugar and material that they've been making in the summertime from photosynthesis, and they take that energy that they've captured from the sun, and the maple trees, they send it down to their roots. They do that in the fall. That way they have that energy stored underground. All that sugar is stored underground. In the springtime, when the weather starts to get warmer and things start to, the sun starts to shine, the days start to get longer, the maple trees, they start to take that stored energy that they put underground and send it back up to the buds, the tips of the branches, so that they can grow new leaves. And when we tap a maple tree, what we're doing is we're tapping in to that flow of energy, that flow of sugar and sap from underground up to the tips of the trees. We can do this really just one time, one part of each year, and that's in the springtime, where the temperatures go below freezing at night and above freezing during the day. So of course, with all these different types of trees out here in the woods, we need to be able to pick out which trees are maple trees and which trees are not. And there are several different ways that I can tell a maple tree from something that's not a maple tree. One of the things that I always look for is I look for how the trees are branching. And there's two main ways that trees can branch. There's what we refer to as opposite branching and what we refer to as alternating branching. Maple trees have opposite branching. So when I'm looking up at the trees, I'm looking for that opposite branching. This branch right here is a good example of something that is not a maple tree. And this has alternating branching. If I look at this twig, I see a branch coming off of one side, and then a little while later, a branch coming off the other side. They alternate, they go every other. Whereas if I look at this twig, I see opposite branching. And I can see the twigs here, the two twigs come off opposite one another. Just like your arms come off opposite of each other on your body, a maple tree, the twigs, they're opposite of each other on the branch. And so we can look up the trunk of a tree and look for that opposite branching. The other thing that I can look for to identify a maple tree is the bark itself. Maple trees, they produce this sap in the springtime, and that sap a lot of times will run out of the tree sort of by accident, and it leaves these black stains on the trunk of the tree. Like for example, here there's a dead branch. Eventually this dead branch is going to fall off and leave some exposed area underneath, and this tree is going to naturally drip out some of that sap, and it's going to stain the tree a black color. And so when I see trunks of trees that have this characteristic black color, I know that's a maple. Also, the way the bark peels off of the trunk can tell me that it's a maple tree. If I look at this piece of bark right here, I can see how it kind of forms a plate and then peels off the trunk of the tree. That's a characteristic of maple trees. Another way that we can identify maple trees is by thinking about how animals use these resources as well. There is a bird called a yellow-bellied sapsucker, and they use maple trees in a pretty unique way. These birds have learned over time, they've evolved over time to use maple sap. And what they do is they actually find a maple tree and they drill a line of very shallow holes all the way across this trunk. And like we talked about before, that tree is going to start to ooze out sap. And the maple, or the yellow-bellied sapsucker, is actually trying to eat the sap. Instead, there are insects, little things like ants that climb up the trunk, and those little tiny insects like the ants are eating that maple sap. They're using the sugar, and the bird will come back to this tree a little while later and they can pick off those little insects. And so we can find maple trees by looking for some of these types of horizontal marks from the yellow-bellied sapsucker. Tapping maple trees is something that human beings have been doing for a long time. Native Americans, they would take maple sap and boil it down to make maple sugar. And this was a very ancient tradition that by doing it today, we're still taking part in this ancient tradition of collecting and harvesting the sap to make maple syrup. In order to get the sap out of the tree, we first need to drill a small hole into the trunk of the tree. And we're gonna drill a hole just in a few inches to that tree. And you'll notice this hole we've drilled up previously has some sap dripping out of it. In order to collect that sap, we're gonna take a tap. This is just a small metal tap that's hollow. It's got a hole right down through the middle. And we're going to pound this tap right into the hole that we drilled. And what we'll notice after a period of time is the sap starts to drip right out of that tap. And you can see there it's coming right now. And we need to catch or collect that sap that's dripping out of the tree. And we do that by hanging something like this bag right onto the tree. And now we're going to wait for a while until this bag fills up, and then we can take that sap and we can bring it down where we'll boil it. This tree has been tapped for quite a while now, and as you can see, the bag that we have hanging on here is getting pretty full of sap, so we're ready to harvest this and bring this down to where we're gonna boil it. So I just have to take that bag right off, and one of the things that you'll notice about the sap is it's real kind of watery looking. Now, that liquid that we just poured into the bucket is about 2% sugar. It's actually a solution of water and sugar. It has just a little bit of sugar in it. So in order to make that sugar into syrup, we need to get rid of a lot of the water. And we're gonna get rid of that water down at our boiling site. So we're back here at our boiling site, and this part of the process, really what we want to do is we want to get rid of the water that's in the sap. As I mentioned before, the maple sap is about 2% sugar. The rest of it is water. And so what we're doing is we're heating up that maple sap in order to boil off, get rid of the water, and the sugar stays behind. And so we're using a propane apparatus, but any heat source will work. More traditional maple sap operations use wood to boil as their heat source. Here we're using propane just because of the convenience and the ease of it. And we're going to continue to boil this. We're going to keep boiling it until it's almost all sugar. And so I'm going to have to boil this for many, many hours before I get it down to a high enough concentration where we can call it syrup. So we've been boiling our sap all day, and what we started off with was somewhere around 20 gallons of sap. And now you can see I boiled it down to this one pot right here that I have on my stove. And I always bring it inside to do the finishing so that I can watch it really closely. And so by getting rid and by boiling all that water, we've gotten rid of most of the water. And what we've done is we've gotten the concentration of sugar to be much higher. So now when I go to boil it, the thing is that when the concentration of sugar goes up, the temperature at which the water boils also goes up. Normally water boils at 212 degrees. I can keep watching the temperature. I've got a little thermometer here, and I can keep watching the temperature, and it's officially changed to syrup when the temperature has reached, or when it starts to boil at 219 degrees. And so you can see we're very, very close to that 219. And so we're officially boiling syrup now. And again, as that concentration of sugar gets higher and higher, the temperature at which it boils gets higher and higher. And now the last step is I'm just going to take my empty syrup jar and pour my hot syrup into that jar. And the ratio of syrup to sap is somewhere around 40-1. That means I started off with about 40 times more sap in order to get this little jar of syrup here. One other thing that I always like to do is, since I've been boiling all day, I like to give myself a little taste of the freshly boiled syrup. That is going to be good on some pancakes.